Welcome to episode 3 of the 226.
Oh boy, we have a big one today.
Yes.
Maybe an understatement.
That is quite an understatement. We are hitting off broad, gigantic topics really fast.
Exactly. I think that's the fun part about it, is we can talk about almost anything within these.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's going to provide an opportunity for us to go back to the episodes and dive deeper in sometime.
Yeah, narrow down maybe some topic that came up that was somewhat controversial or something that people listening thought was interesting. We can maybe explore a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, we should work for audience integration. I think that'd be cool.
I think so as well.
Create a conversation, because, that's what the show's about.
Yeah. Look forward to that in the coming weeks. But for today, we have our broad topic is communication.
Here we go.
And oh my goodness, there are just so many things that we could start off discussing. We actually did a little bit more blocking of how we want to approach this episode, because it is so broad. We need an approach that will make sense and won't just kind of bounce all over the place.
Yeah.
So I want to preface this with communication is literally everywhere, anything that you do. If you are in class, if you are a parent, if you are in a relationship, if you are making a song, you are communicating something. Even when you're just sitting there reading a book, you're communicating that to the people who observe you.
Exactly.
You can't control how other people perceive you to 100%, but you can kind of give off those opinions. You're always communicating something.
Yeah.
It's always in action. And it applies to every aspect of your life. So understanding how communication works, studying it, getting a better understanding of it, will kind of make you better at all of those different aspects, especially when you kind of have a way to view it as well.
My favorite part of communication for sure is the immediate application. Just like we talk about something, I'm thinking about sometime in my life that's happened or that I want to apply to in the future.
Exactly.
And without that, communication wouldn't be, but it does that. Words.
Exactly. We'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Yep.
So to start off, we should probably define what we view communication to be. And our definition is very loose, because we do want it to be very broad and we want it to apply to so many different situations.
Yes, exactly.
So for the sake of this episode, we'll define communication as, or the study of communication as the studying how messages work. How do messages get across? Or how do interactions work between people, between a person and an audience, between a medium and an audience, between a person working through a medium, like a song. There's just so many different ways that you can look at it, and that's what makes it interesting, I think. So studying communication has a lot of different approaches, and I think the one that's the most beneficial is to use a theoretical approach. You have a theory, which is basically just a way to understand how to view the world. Yeah. It's like a pair of glasses. So you can put on a pair of glasses that's designed to help you read things better, a pair of reading glasses, and it will bring things more into focus in that situation.
Yep.
So you can use those reading glasses for that situation. If you try to use that for looking far away, you may be using the theory in the wrong way. But when it comes to the things that are right in front of you, using those glasses will give you a clear understanding of what's going on, and you'll be able to read, work with, and elaborate on the things right in front of you much easier.
Yeah. I think communication theories, like when you say theories, that can be scary, I think, to some people. But communication theories are actually usually pretty easy to understand.
Oh, yeah.
Because you've experienced most of them already.
And that's where that instant application comes in.
Yeah.
Is you'll view a theory and you'll put on a new set of glasses, and all of a sudden this comes very much into focus, and it might be something that you weren't aware of before.
Yeah.
But it's been there the whole time, and it's always enacted, and you can move on from there. And that the instant application is that now that I understand how this works, I can better go about my day-to-day life with this in my back pocket as a way to understand how things work.
Yeah.
Let's use an example of how something like this would go about. One of my favorite theories is relational dialectics theory. It was pioneered, constructed by Leslie Baxter and Barbara Montgomery, and I think there are two researchers who are actually still doing research and still expanding on their theory.
I was reading something the other day And you asked, is that by Baxter? I said, yeah, and you just dropped a book on my lap. So
Yep,
they're very much relevant.
Very much still relevant. I think they might be finishing or getting to the end of their careers, but very long, illustrious, and a theory that I found very helpful in understanding interpersonal relationships, for sure. Mm-hmm. So the way that they saw the world, their theoretical lens, was that they saw tensions everywhere. Tensions between people in groups. There's just tensions found all around them. And there's often dialectical tensions, which means that they're opposing forces pulling you one way or the other. So they kind of narrowed down 3 different dialectical tensions that were present in every relationship that they studied. And those tensions were the tension between the desire for connectivity and the desire for autonomy. Mm-hmm. And then you have the desire for spontaneity versus predictability. Mm-hmm. And then the last tension was openness versus closeness. So understanding relationships from the idea that there are going to be opposing forces at play, there are going to be tensions, and that those tensions have to be managed, gives you a newfound understanding of how to approach your own interpersonal relationships. Yeah. So let's say, like, if I was talking with my girlfriend and she said, oh, I want to hang out with you at this time, but mm-hmm. I kind of was desiring more autonomy at the time. I wanted more independence. There's a tension. I have one idea about how I think the relationship should be going, and she might have another one. And so we have to manage that. That's something we would have to talk about and figure out, how are we going to compromise to make this work? Yeah. You know, maybe I sacrifice my individuality for the sake of our relationship in that situation. Mm-hmm. When it comes to the other one, every relationship has to have some sort of predictability, right? So you say hello, you kind of expect a hello back, yeah. Especially for someone you're in a very close yeah. relationship with. It's something you sort of grow to expect. And not wrongly so.
Yeah, but then, like, if they don't say hello back, that's communicating something huge.
Exactly. So it's everywhere. You can yeah. see this. You can say, "Oh my goodness, something is wrong here because it's not going the way
yeah.
it's planned."
Yeah.
But every relationship also has to have times where there's some novelty, where there's some unpredictability, some spontaneity, mm-hmm. where you're not. Otherwise, it just becomes boring.
Yeah.
It really does.
You wouldn't want to be in the relationship that feels the same for 20 years. Like, yeah. you want the same love and...
Mm-hmm. But you always want to be able to grow and experience new things.
Exactly.
And maybe novel things as well.
Yeah.
And then the last one, openness versus closeness. If there are some things that, say, like my girlfriend and I thought that we should keep secret about our relationship, that would be and I thought that was something that we should tell other people. There's another tension. Yep. It's like inclusive or secluded about the way that we go about talking about us. Yep. Like, that would be another tension. Mm-hmm. So even hypothetically, we just directly applied this theory to an interpersonal romantic relationship.
Yeah. And
found out new ways that we can look about managing those tensions, and understanding that might give us a better idea of why things feel tense or why things feel off. Yeah. And then we can better go about our day-to-day lives.
I think knowing these tensions, it creates such a more mature adult relationship with anyone, mm-hmm. or knowing certain theories, because you have to talk about them. If you leave these go untouched, it's like you're dating in 6th grade. You don't know what you're doing. You're not going to talk about things, and that's just not healthy.
Yeah.
In my mind. So I think a healthy conversation, a healthy relationship really talks about these, carries on life like that, and
yeah,
you just have to be real with the other person.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Because otherwise those tensions just go untouched, and then they fizzle out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Big point I have is that, like, even just this one theory, creative content creators, I think, either have an intuitive knowledge of these and of communication, or they work to understand it, and they need to understand it. I think without that, that creative content won't necessarily work. I think the most effective understands, this is how I can communicate, this is how other people are going to view it, this is what will give me the most power to deliver the most powerful message. Mm-hmm. And once you have all that knowledge and tool, or at least a little bit of understanding, you can provide media that is much more powerful and useful.
And that's not to say that people who don't have this intuitive understanding of how messages work well can't make creative content.
Yeah.
When it came to something as simple as conversation, I was not very good at socializing. Mm-hmm. But you can learn these things. You can study them, and it becomes a little bit more natural. Yeah. You can always improve on it. So although I might not be the best conversationalist or the most intuitive one, mm-hmm. I can still improve the skills that I have and expound upon them. Yeah. And that carries out in the same way for content creators as well. Mm-hmm. I might not be able to tell the best story now, but if I understand why short stories or how movies work the way they do, and then I can kind of emulate that or mm-hmm. understand that, I'll be able to apply that in my own work as well.
Yeah. And I think that also just goes back to the Eric Glass quote we talked about episode 1.
Exactly.
That you just got to get through content and to get better. Mm-hmm. And you just got to keep doing it, and you'll learn from just doing what you do.
I agree. So maybe going along with that is more in general, communication. I think it's much better when you seek first to understand the other person in front of you or your audience, and after that then seek to be understood. I see this so often in social media where people are primarily communicating seeking to be understood, mm-hmm. not even taking into account that there's someone else to be understood as well.
Yeah.
So when it comes to debates about politics or whatever heated topic there might be, it's just so much seeking to be understood, and then both sides just doing that. There's no empathy involved. Yeah. And it really tears down effective problem-solving type communication.
Yeah. Empathy is such a large part of it. And what I find interesting is that to know more about how you are going to be able to best communicate, you have to learn more about how other people will perceive you. That seeking to understand first, mm-hmm. instead of being understood first. Sounds backwards, but it's really the most efficient and human and kind way mm-hmm. to go about communication, for sure.
Definitely.
Like, after a while, it's just kind of rude. If you're, hey, understand me, obviously that's blunt, but just if you keep posting about yourself, if you keep talking about yourself, instead of reaching out saying, hey, how can I best talk to you? Or what are your thoughts on this topic, before you just let your mouth fly about what you feel about politics or something. Yeah.
And you kind of ignore the other person.
Yeah.
There's even theories about that, I think. There's how do you treat the other person, or how are you implicitly treating the other person in the way that you talk to them? Do you treat them as another person, or are you treating them as this, like, just this object that's supposed to understand what you're saying? Mm-hmm. And the difference there is drastic.
Yeah. And I think that's so much different online than in face-to-face conversation. Like, this is something that books have been written about already, and
it changes all the time too.
Yeah.
The new media that we have is changing constantly. So although there's plenty of research out there about how communication in the online world kind of works, mm-hmm. compared to the real world, so to speak.
Yeah.
There's still so much to be studied and understood.
Yeah.
Because those things evolve all the time. New technology. I mean, if you try to do a study 5 years ago about the implications of Snapchat or some new way of communicating with other people, you wouldn't have been able to. Yeah. It didn't exist. It was not able to be studied. And now studying it, that this technology works for us, that we have this as a way to communicate, fundamentally changes the way that we think about how the world works.
Yeah.
You can't. Maybe some people can't even imagine not being able to communicate via Snapchat. They came of age just as that was becoming a thing, and that's just how they understand communication to be.
Yeah.
And that's a theory in and of itself, the whole idea that the medium is the message.
Oh, yes.
And so every time a new way to communicate comes about, your understanding about the way communication works between other people changes at a baseline level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's irreversible. You can't go back to that unless you completely remove that technology. But no one's going to take Snapchat away, that's for sure. That's going to stay.
The whole concept of the medium is the message. It's looking past what people are saying at the time and seeing what are they using to say that.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. And that's just... Do you remember who said that? We should have looked that up.
The medium is the message?
Yeah.
I can look up who researched it.
But anyway, just like... this came up just early on when texting was becoming a thing, or when conversations started to change. Instead of always being face-to-face, now we have all these different ways of doing it. Because, I mean, it went from, hey, we're face-to-face to, I can write this down, and then letters, and now you have phone calls, and then texting, and all this. So the medium changes so much, and I think it's only accelerating.
Marshall McLuhan.
Yeah.
Very interesting stuff. And it's gone throughout the entirety of human history.
Yeah.
Even when they first started writing things down, how did that change how people thought about communicating with other people?
Yeah.
Now words aren't just something spoken. There's something that I can write down and preserve.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to be around a stone. I have parchment and paper. I can make those words last a long time.
Yeah.
So what does that do to storytelling? What does that do to your ability to remember things, or how you think about how you need to remember things? It's just an irreversible change. And it's very interesting when you start talking about something like movies or songwriting.
Yeah.
How does that make things work differently?
Yeah. I kind of want to move on, but it ties in completely. How conversation has changed, and then the vulnerability of conversation.
I agree.
So, when you're talking face to face, you don't have time to stop, think, what am I going to say?
Oh no.
And that's what texting provides. That's what email provides. So, being able to just talk one-on-one with someone, just completely stream of consciousness, that's both not a dying art, but not everyone is good at it anymore.
Yeah.
Or not as many people are, just because of how much we use texting. I'm reading a book right now called Reclaiming Conversation. We'll talk more about it later.
Mm-hmm.
But in that book, it talks about how teenagers, high schoolers, college students they strive for texting because they can't mess up, in theory. It's a safer environment to talk because there's not as much vulnerability.
And that goes the same for like Facebook or any other virtual type of communication.
Yeah.
It's just you're more safe behind that when you're not upfront and personal with someone.
Everyone can be brave behind a keyboard.
Exactly.
Someone told me that a while ago, and it was just this light that, wow, yes.
It really resonates. The things, if you imagine people saying the things they say on social media in person to the audience that they gave it to, it's just sometimes baffling to comprehend. Would this person there's no way this person would actually say that, but they're saying it online.
Yeah.
And that that says something about what the differences are between the real world and saying something virtually.
I had a huge experience with this 2 years ago now. Some friends and I we made a video. It was just a fun type music video, and it exploded. Like, we did not expect this to be popular online at all. Mm-hmm. Just crazy amount of views in a short amount of time. And so it was great. I mean, we're enjoying how well it went. Mm-hmm. Kind of like, it was a total surprise to us. So it's just this great thing. Then like a couple weeks into the video being posted online, we get this message from someone just saying, hey, I don't like what you did. Essentially, I don't want to talk too much about it, but they really wanted us to take the video down, thought it was offensive to so many people. and that we were purposely mocking others with specific ideas and rose-colored glasses, essentially. But it was just, we never actually got the chance to sit down in a room with these people who didn't like it. And just what they were saying online, I remember conversations super late at night that we were just talking, like, if we actually sat down, these people would not be saying what they're saying.
Yeah.
Because the computer provides just the safety net of, oh, they can't backlash immediately. They can't deny what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that's just honestly, online conversation is almost just two one-way streets.
Yeah, definitely. I think even maybe a related example would be someone like deadmau5. Very open in his usage of Twitter. He uses Twitter all the time.
Yeah.
And I happen to follow him. I think he's an interesting artist, and I like to see what he's up to. But there was an interview that I saw with him as well, where he said, on Twitter I get into these heated, debates or heated discussions with certain individuals who are saying stupid stuff. And it happens all the time. But he said, never, ever has this happened in the real world where someone came up and said anything remotely like what they'll say to me on Twitter.
Yeah.
Never has anyone come up and said, I hate your music. But people say that on Twitter all the time. Be like, oh, you're washed up. You're a terrible artist. Your music sucks. They'll say that online, but then when it comes to the real world, granted, he might not be in a position where people that don't like his music probably are not coming to his shows.
Yeah.
But even so, just in his day-to-day experiences, he's never had anything remotely like that.
Yeah.
He's had disagreements with people. He's had maybe disagreements with other artists, and there's been critics who have called him out in real life, but those are about different things, and the way the conversation is handled is very different than it would be otherwise.
Yeah.
But the vulnerability of just talking one-on-one is completely intriguing to me.
Yes. I could talk about that for so long.
I think we're, even in this podcast, the way we say things, I know that I'm making mistakes. Like even in that sentence, I stuttered, right? Like and right now I'm trying to say like 3 different ideas at once, and maybe that says something about my personality, but I tend to jump from idea to idea without fully completing the thought. Yeah. And that is ineffective in the way that I talk, and I'm trying to work on, and something that doing this podcast is actually helping me with, because it forces me to think about completing all of my sentences way ahead of time. Yeah. So I know that I'm going to be making mistakes as this podcast goes on, even as long as it does continue, however many seasons we end up getting around to. Yeah. But I don't think that it's a bad thing. I think all it does is present a learning opportunity, something to improve on. Yeah. So actually doing something like this is actually helpful for me.
Yeah, totally. Personality theory just plays into the vulnerability online so much, I think. Because like for me, generally I like to think that I've finished thoughts. I just have a lot of short thoughts. And I find this in my writing quite often. I'll write something or start writing a report, and all of a sudden I'll go back and read it, and it's just the choppiest thing in the world. And it's like stringing together ideas to create one big idea is such a more powerful tool than all these short little things. And it's how do I get better at that? And it's conversation. Conversation cures. Yeah. And you just gotta do it.
I think the idea of personality theories and how that applies to communication is very interesting as well. Yeah. So the idea is that we all have traits that are unique to us, or not unique, or not, how should I say this? We all have traits that can be observed. Yes. In who we are. For example, John is an extrovert. Quite. And John is an introvert. So that brings about some kind of fundamental changes about the way we think about discussion and talking and conversation. Yeah. I will tend to think about things before I say them, even if it's just right before. Yeah. But I'll think about a number of different ways that I can say something, and then I'll choose one path. And sometimes I end up getting about partially through a sentence, and then I'll kind of divert that path, and then I'll kind of change, and so it kind of has like checkpoints as it goes along the way. But I tend to have that kind of processing going on, as I'm always trying to think about what I can say next, kind of precogniting what I want to say. Whereas,
yeah, see, I don't do that at all. That entire time I was just listening to you, and now I'm just speaking. I don't know. The words just kind of come.
they just happen.
Yep, they just kind of happen. So for me, I think that's why my thoughts are so short, and why I just make all these little thoughts and ideas, because I don't consciously think about what I'm going to say before I say it.
And all this time that you've been talking, I've been thinking about how I'm going to respond to you.
Yeah. And
so it's just very wildly different ways of approaching something. And so understanding a dynamic like introversion versus extroversion is so unique, and it applies in so many different ways. Understanding that you might be speaking to someone who has a different way of thinking about how they talk might change the way that you talk to them in a positive way, because you'll understand where they're coming from more.
Yeah, exactly.
Another aspect of personality that might be interesting to talk about when thinking about communication is the dynamic of thinking versus feeling.
Yes.
There's another place that we're so different in, and the way we express ourselves is very drastic, I think.
Yeah.
Because you're much more of a feeler, and I'm much more of a thinker. And that might kind of correlate with our introversion, extroversion, but it definitely just says there's just so many differences in how we express ourselves.
Yeah. So quite often I just go with what I'm feeling at the time. I'm very spur of the moment, but just, it's not a gut feeling, but it's a gut feeling. Like, I'm passionate about this. Okay, we're going into it. Yes. No going back. I just feel that this is the right thing to do, say, talk about at the moment, and I just go with it.
Yeah. And I'm cold-hearted. I feel nothing. I just think about things. No, that's false. And that's the error or the criticism of using something like trait theory in personalities as a way to view things, because it's not as if a person is either an extrovert or an introvert. There might be situations where they kind of switch. It's a fluid thing. It's a continuum. And we kind of draw that line in the middle. You might be very close to either side.
Yeah.
How different are these two people? Well, you have a different label for them, but they're actually much closer than someone who's a little bit farther on either side. So it's not as if being labeled as a thinker versus a feeler means that you don't feel anything. Although I might joke about it, and it's funny.
It really is.
It's not something that holds true 100% of the time. So it's not a valid assumption to make when you talk about traits in that way. Yeah. It's a continuum, and that's something to keep in mind as you're using that. But that doesn't mean that there isn't something to be said for someone who is very much an extrovert or very much an introvert, or even partially on one side. I think that you can make some broad generalizations and use that to your benefit, while keeping in mind that those things may or may not be 100% true all of the time. If you allow for that variability inside your understanding, I think that it's a safe way to look at things in a beneficial way.
Yeah. What I find interesting, and a big takeaway of like knowing that you're an introvert, or no, I know what like 20 of my friends are now. I'm trying to draw from what you do subconsciously and put that in my life. So I don't consciously think about what I say all the time, but I'm trying to do that. It's the hardest thing in the world for me.
Especially like in this podcast even, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The way you're writing down notes and things beforehand.
Yeah. So I'm trying to be more articulate that way, and just gather my thoughts and go with it then, rather than, okay, let's talk, and this is what I feel right now, and you never know what's going to happen. And I just end up talking really fast sometimes because I get really excited, and all of a sudden I'm just talking, and where does it go? I don't know, but it just happens.
Words.
Yeah, word vomit.
It's interesting seeing how that shapes the way we're talking in this podcast even.
Yeah.
Because I am being the opposite. Usually tend to not write everything down, but at least think about everything beforehand. And I'll have kind of an idea of how I want to say it beforehand, and I can kind of just follow that path along. I'm trying not to do that for this podcast, although we have maybe some vague outline of how we want to progress through the topics. I'm not sitting there thinking about it for a while beforehand. I'm trying to be able to speak more off the cuff.
Yeah.
And it's not because I think being an extrovert type speaker is better. That's not the point at all. I think it's more about broadening your horizons for being able to communicate in different ways, because who knows, it might become something that helps you out down the line.
Yeah. It's just another tool in the toolbox of conversation, really. And when you have all these tools, I think that's when you become a better communicator.
And that will display itself in all of your content that you make, everything that you write, every person that you talk to.
Yeah. It goes back to being understanding others before being understood.
Yeah. The whole idea of empathy.
Yes.
And that studying communication in general necessitates an empathetic type of individual.
Yeah.
You can't study this and be like, oh, I will ignore the other people and see how I can. That's manipulative. That's,
it really is.
That's terrible. But when you take into consideration those other people and see how can I do things better so that it helps us progress in some direction.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me. I could study it for the rest of my life.
Oh, yes. Agreed. No, empathy is just... It's something that we are honestly losing as a human race. And it's because of our phones and technology and everything. Because we go into this solitude where our phones all of a sudden become our stream of consciousness. Our phones become one with our brain, and we're so attached to them that, like, handing my phone to someone is this stressful thing. I don't know why. I have nothing to hide in my phone. Nothing at all. Yeah, it is password protected by 6 numbers. My fingerprint only unlocks it, and no one else knows that. So my brain has now... My phone has become an extension of my brain. And it's become... Back up. So the hammer was created. The hammer is now an extension of your hand. You can do bigger and better things with it. It's a new tool. Or the screwdriver, or... like cooking utensils. A saw. Yeah. So these are these new tools, essentially not peripherals, but extensions of the human body. We can do new things. And phones, especially smartphones, and how fast they're progressing, have become not an extension of our arms, hands, feet, but now an extension of the brain. And that is so powerful.
The way you can present yourself to people through mobile media is
and it's
fascinating.
It's powerful, fascinating, and terrifying to me.
I think maybe at some point, instead of us thinking of the phone as like an extension of the way we can present ourselves to others, that becomes the way we present ourselves to others, and we forget that we can have face-to-face interaction. So it's like, not only am I just using this hammer in the ways that can be like, now everything's a nail and you're just pounding everything away, like that's not not how you should use this extension of your body. You should still remember that you have other tools in your tool belt, and you can use those.
And this plays into relationships just completely, especially like, how do you view your relationship with someone just talking like we are now versus online? And now all of a sudden you kind of have 2 different relationships with everybody in your life.
I agree.
So there are similarities. I mean, you can get close to someone online just by talking, texting, typing, Skyping and FaceTiming, things like that. But there are stark differences. You can't read somebody. You can't read tone. I mean, you'll try to do that, but it's so easy to be misunderstood when you're talking online or something like that.
What do you lose when you communicate virtually versus being there in person?
Yeah, and it's that human element, essentially. Like, you could
even something like Skype.
Yeah.
It's not quite the same as like actually having that person there.
Yeah.
Like, I don't feel anything at all, but then I feel something, and I'm right there. Like, there's a difference between someone sitting on my couch and someone going through a computer screen. Not to saying that, like, you shouldn't use this at all. It's a tool. It's a tool that you can use, and it's very beneficial to many people, especially when you're separated by great distances. But the difference between being able to text someone and then being able to talk to you on the couch. Yeah. Very different things.
Right.
So
I think texting is so sporadic too. Like when you have most text messages are like less than a centimeter long. Weird way to describe conversation length, but I mean, it's true.
And they're often misunderstood, misinterpreted.
Yes. Or forgotten to be talked about, or completely ignored. And that's the thing, like, you can completely ignore someone with no consequences online. Whereas sometimes
from your perspective, yes.
Yeah, that's also a personality thing.
I like the idea of if you have like tennis balls in your hand. I can't remember where I heard this. It's probably a class I took, but you have the idea that you have tennis balls in your hand, and if you want to talk to someone, you can like bounce them a tennis ball. And if you miss, or if they like just drop it and don't respond, you've got two more, and you can try again. But after the third time, like if they're just not answering you, whether it's in media or it's harder to do that in person, it's harder to ignore, but online it's so easy to just stop. But what does that say? Like, how does that make you feel as an individual when you're throwing tennis balls and you're not getting tennis balls back? So you can see it. Probably maybe have a friend who throws a ton of tennis balls but doesn't receive many tennis balls back. Or maybe some people who are known for not throwing tennis balls back. It's just a fascinating idea to me that not only can you can ignore someone without the negative consequences on your part, but the person who's trying to interact with you might feel some type of way about that, or that might say something about your relationship. So
then what I feel is interesting is when you don't have someone you want to talk to, when you're just in solitude, and all of a sudden all you're doing is throwing tennis balls at a Facebook wall, like literally and metaphorically. So you go to Facebook or some online place, and that's your haven,
your outlet.
That's where you exist, and that can be good for a time, but I think the lack of real conversation with people it's a scary thing.
There's another theory that kind of plays into that, and it's a speech act theory.
Okay.
And the idea is that everything that people say has a purpose. So when you say things, that's a goal-driven behavior. Every time you say something, there's something that you're trying to accomplish, whether it's maintaining a relationship or advancing your position at work or winning an argument. You're always goal-driven. And it's easy to apply in real life. So you have friends speaking, or an argument taking place, and someone yells something at someone. They're using nonverbal communication as a form of sort of aggressive, dominant type of communication. That's what they're trying to exemplify. That's the goal behind why they're raising their voice. That can also apply to the words that you say. So an example would be, hey, do you want to go get dinner later? If I said that to you, my goal is that I want to go have dinner with you. It seems like a very, very simple thing, but it has implications online as well. Because oftentimes you can like scroll through like a Facebook wall or a Twitter feed, and if you apply this theory to what you see online, it becomes very interesting. What do you think are the goals that these people are trying to accomplish? Is this person looking for validation? Do they want people to like what they say? Do they want people to know how they feel? Are they seeking pity? Are they seeking something else? Are they seeking security in their identity? It's just there's so much to explore there, and I think a lot is lost with not having as much face-to-face talk and having way too much throwing tennis balls at a Facebook wall.
You reminded me of a song that I think became popular like my late grade school years already. So we're talking like 7, 8 years ago now.
Oh boy.
So I'm pretty sure it was called I'm So Much Cooler Online. I think it's a country song. I don't listen to country.
I'm gonna look it up and see if this is a...
Okay, so you look that up. But even 7, 8 years ago, we're already talking
Sure enough.
that people create a different self online.
Brad Paisley.
Yeah, look at
I'm
that.
so much cooler online.
And so you can portray yourself as someone completely different online.
You get so much control over how you can be perceived by others.
Yeah.
Whereas face to face, you have your nonverbals, what you look like, how you're acting, your posture and everything, and then what you say. But online, you can choose what picture that people see every time they see your status or your interactions with other people. You can choose how to express yourself and choose who sees what you say, and it's just the whole idea, the whole ecology of social media is fascinating and sometimes I believe detrimental to an understanding of how connecting with other people ought to work.
Yeah.
This is funny to me, that this whole Brad Paisley song, because I never listened to country, so I've probably never listened to this song. But the fact that it was made, where does it say?
Yeah, do we have a copyright?
Let's find out.
You find that. I've been terrified that this hasn't been recording, but it is recording. So that's been bugging me for 15 minutes.
2009. So that's 8 years ago. No. 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Even so, that's quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
And
you think how far social media has progressed since then?
Yeah.
So like 7 years ago we had what, MySpace?
Was Instagram a thing 7 years ago?
I don't even know. And now you can zoom in on pictures on Instagram. Wow.
Really?
Yeah. At least that's an update.
The whole way that I perceive the way communication works is now fundamentally changing.
Because I can zoom into your eye.
I can zoom in to Instagram pictures.
Yeah.
But who knows? Like, even just thinking about what it's like for an Instagram content creator, this new ability, this new technology inside that app is going to change the way that they make their shots.
Okay.
To change the way they upload photos or what kind of content that they can put up there. Mm-hmm. It fundamentally changes how you process decision making about what you do as most likely a photographer or maybe even any other, like a musician or something.
Yeah.
But there's just communication is everywhere, and it is applied in literally any situation that you want it to.
Yeah.
And it will oftentimes always make you better at what you do.
Yeah.
Just the understanding.
What you just said, decision making.
Oh, I love it.
Okay, so in my mind, decision making, every single day we go through so many decisions. And I think the number of decisions that we have to make is growing every single day also.
Yes.
Because of social media and online and what you're making as a creator, who you talk to. That's insane. I haven't thought about it much just because it's coming out, but how many decisions we make every day. And that's why you can be exhausted just by sitting at work in a cubicle doing things.
You can be interacting with so many people even though you're alone by yourself in your bedroom.
Yeah.
Like, I'm an introvert. I'm usually alone by myself in my bedroom doing something with music or something.
Yeah.
So like that's me in my spot.
Uh-huh.
But
John has a sweet studio in his bedroom, by the way, like super awesome.
Anyway, there's just and see, now I forgot what I was gonna say.
You were talking about how you're usually in your bedroom alone.
Oh, but you can still be. That sounds so sad because I'm really okay with it. It's not a problem. I like it. It's me in my natural element. But I can still, even though and this can apply to like extroverts as well. Like, you can be sitting on your couch and no one else is around you, but you're still interacting with hundreds of people.
Yes.
And that's taxing on what you can like physically do. You can't connect with that many people. You can't have personal connections with any more than I think they did research. It was about, what, 150?
Yeah.
About 150 people. That is the maximum number of meaningful interactions that you can maintain as a human being.
Yeah.
And if you have thousands of friends, then you're trying to manage your face before all of them online. It's just, there's so many interesting things happening, and
Yeah.
there's so many questions to be asked.
So, sitting alone on your couch, on your phone, you are no longer alone. And then I think we are losing our capacity for solitude,
Yes.
for self-reflection,
Well, maybe
self-thinking.
I like to think that I still hold that
Yes. But like people you see maybe in a train, like a subway station, no one's just gonna sit there. If there's a phone in the pocket, it's out. Like just the concept of solitude, even people don't use as much anymore.
Yeah.
I have time to think now. Not many people do that.
The ability to self-reflect.
Yeah.
Just kind of, I love just going and sitting out on the porch during like a storm or something, and just sitting there, and it's just, I love it. It's just like this, I don't know, weird like self-awareness, something.
Yeah.
It's just, I love it. The ability to reflect on whatever's on your mind, just to think about things, just to reprocess them.
Yeah.
The idea of solitude as an agent for that is, probably becoming a little bit of a lost art.
Yeah. And I think
Similarly to conversation.
I feel that we as a society are constantly expected to be connected. And that's where solitude is just going down the drain.
Yeah.
It's
So fascinating.
Yeah, totally. Now I
The-
just want to go sit by myself.
Now you just want to go sit by yourself.
Me and my thoughts.
Yeah, I think it is becoming something that less and less people are able to do, because they have this feeling that they shouldn't really be alone. You're expected to share things with everyone, and all the time you lose that individual sense of, no, I can not be interacting with people and I'll be okay. I'll be fine. But some people feel that just because of nature, nurture, or both, that they need to be constantly interacting with people in order to preserve their self-identity.
Yeah. That's an extrovert thing for sure.
Yeah.
Like when I have to sit down and edit pictures, I will consciously go to a place where I know people are going to be walking by me. Because I hate being just alone with the pictures. It just kind of drives me crazy sometimes.
Yeah, and that's interesting, like the introvert-extrovert ideas, because the time that you really shine as a content creator, I think, is when you're right behind the lens and you're actually taking that picture. You're interacting with those people. Like, I see that, like, you've got that spark in your eye at that time. Whereas my spark is probably by myself. I accidentally did some mistake with a routing situation in FL Studio, and all of a sudden a new sound comes up, and that's when I get really excited. That's when I feel like the cataracts or something. I can hear this one's gonna sell 5 million records. No, that's it's just an example of how differences in personality can express themselves differently in the way that you interact with creative content.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
should we talk about some books that we could?
I was going to ask the same question.
Yeah, let's talk about some literature that we both have either read or are about to read.
Yeah.
That kind of expands on these ideas and gives us a fuller understanding of how communication works.
Yeah.
Either in a broad sense or in a very specific sense. And I think these books, you could say that they have influenced the way that we do things.
Oh, for sure.
Quite a bit. So we can start out with Reclaiming Conversation. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned this book, Reclaiming Conversation by Sherry Turkle. Recommended to me by a friend who was recommended the book by one of our professors. And the book goes on and it talks about empathy. And it's essentially the jury coming back about what phones have done to us. So iPhone came out like 9 years ago now, jury went out. What is this going to do to us 9 years later, almost 10 years later? Now we're finding out what's happened.
Yeah.
And it's found that phones are creating a lack of empathy in humans. And we've talked about that in this podcast already. So John just moved his phone off the table. So it talks about how even a phone on the table, not you even using the phone, but a phone on the table can change how a conversation goes. Because is that phone going to ring? Is that going to happen? Mm-hmm. And now you have people like stacking up their phones at a dinner, first one to check pays, and things like that. And so that thing I said about bouncing tennis balls off a Facebook wall, people going online for solitude,
which really isn't solitude.
No, exactly. So the book has made me guilty about using my phone. Every time I pull out my phone and there's someone in front of me, I feel terrible now. So I'm trying to cut down on my time using it because I don't want to lose empathy, because empathy is such a powerful tool.
Yeah.
And it's really scary how much phones have done for us. I love that they're an extension of our brain. I hate that they're an extension of my brain. So it's an interesting thing. And so the title, Reclaiming Conversation, the whole concept, how do we fix this? What's going to happen if we don't fix it? And the cure is conversation. We need to have kids in schools talking to each other. We need to talk like we are in this podcast.
Yeah, experiencing that vulnerability and being able to deal with it is a big part.
Exactly.
Book I want to talk about is Quiet by Susan Cain. She's delivered a TED Talk or two, I believe, about this idea.
She has,
yeah, Susan Cain.
Oh my gosh.
John has another video to watch. Susan Cain gave a TED Talk about, I think it was the introvert-extrovert idea. And I think whether it's the media portraying this, she talks about extroverts being the ideal, the charismatic, outgoing type, charming personality. And that becomes the expectation, kind of takes away from people like me who might be more at home, literally at home, doing something in a more quiet situation. That was the idea that introversion versus extroversion really is where your energy source comes from, not only how you process information. So John gets his energy by being with other people, being behind that lens and taking that picture of them. Whereas I get my energy from more of a quiet situation, one or two people around, maybe even just by myself. That's where I find that I have renewed energy to socialize with others. And so she talks about a variety of different things, including media, education, how does group work affect your ability to think critically about things. And she found that solitude actually provided a much more ideal situation for thinking of creative ideas than group work.
Yeah, I've heard that.
You sit in a group and it's whoever's the most extroverted person there just does all the talking and everyone else just kind of listens, and you don't really actually have the presence of mind, the solitude necessary to actually think of new ideas. So there's plenty of great ideas in that book. Definitely resonated with me being an introvert. I think it's interesting for both introverts and extroverts. It sounds like it's like an us versus them thing. It's really not. I don't think it should be. I think it's just a way of understanding how different people act in different situations. So,
Quiet is on my list. That's the next book I'm going to read after Reclaiming. I'm going to move to the next book. Talk Like Ted is a book I just finished. Talk Like Ted by Carmine Gallo. I wish I want to meet this guy and pronounce his name. But wow, is this book eye-opening. So Talk Like Ted goes through 9 chapters, 9 ideas of what makes a TED Talk a TED Talk. And as much as I love TED Talks, that's why I picked up the book, because I want to know how to talk like them. I want to know how to tell stories like they do. So that's another book he has, Be a Better Storyteller, something like that. But Talk Like Ted really opened up my eyes of how can I portray my ideas? How can I give everyone my ideas in a passionate way? And something from the book that really resonated was ideas are the currency of the 21st century. if you have an idea, you hold on to that, you run with it, make it happen, and then tell other people about it passionately, and that's what's going to spur on the human race, essentially.
I can see especially how that would be something that works with TED very well.
Yeah.
Ideas worth sharing. That's literally the motto of this,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly. Like, ideas worth spreading to other people. So, like, if that's the currency, like, there's the wealth that you're looking for.
Yeah, so power to the people is everyone has these ideas and we need to share them.
And how do you share them effectively?
Yeah, exactly.
So that probably applies a lot to creative content.
Yeah, and that's why I picked up the book, because I figured there was a correlation.
And there definitely was.
Yeah, for sure. Like, after this book, I've looked at videos I've made in the past and been like, oh, that was terrible. Like, I just made a narrative for the school we went to go to, and I should have written the narrative completely differently, spoken it differently, and just, I would have done so many things different if I had read this book before. But now, going forward, I learned from that.
And the ability to critique yourself about that is worthwhile in and of itself.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I just like that idea.
Yeah. It's a powerful book. Talk Like Ted by Carmine G.
Carmine, yeah. Very interesting. That's definitely on my list of books to read as well.
Yeah.
I remember the first time that you saw it, or were reading it, that you read the first chapter, and I think I got a text message or something. John, this book is amazing. And it was
Probably all caps.
It was all caps, and it was a lot of short ideas in little space, and I was like, wow, you're such an ENFP. But it's definitely a book that I want to read, because I think I'd get a lot out of it as well. And it gives you a new way of framing how you can critique creative content.
Yeah.
So even things like professors in a classroom, like you're able to, I remember one class you said, John, this professor literally does everything that this book said to do without even knowing about it, and it's amazing.
That class is the best class I've ever had.
And it's the best class I've ever had. And there are some professors who do none of those things.
Oh my gosh.
And it feels boring. So it's not to say that this is, 10 different things he talks about is a comprehensive way to be a good teacher. But there's definitely something there.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's something to take away. Last book I think we should talk about, it's called Social Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. And I purposefully didn't have an outline about how I want to talk about this book, because that's the goal of me doing this podcast, is that I'm able to think. There's a long word that starts with E, extemporaneously, I believe is the word I'm looking for.
Good word.
Think off the cuff. But I'll just start with a little story that was inside this book. And that was, there was a man who was in an accident and it severed part of his optical nerve, so he's no longer able to see. And he found that years later, even though he was unable to see anything or could barely remember what shapes were like and how things actually looked when he could see, he would enter a room and he would be able to sense what the mood was. The difference in mood of a room between someone on their deathbed and a birthday party, regardless of what sounds you hear, or like the mood is different. He found that he was able to pick up on that, and researchers thought this was so interesting. So they put him in an fMRI machine, which I believe, I don't know the science behind it, but I believe it's able to, it's like a picture of what parts of your brain are active, but instead of just a picture like an MRI, it's like a movie.
Yeah.
So they're able to see, as things are going on in real time, what parts of his brain are lighting up. So what they did is they put him in this machine and they displayed pictures of people who are having some kind of emotion. So someone who's angry is kind of like frowning, their eyebrows are pointed down, they have like a snarl on their mouth. And then someone who's smiling, they're really happy, they're talking, like they just put those pictures in front of him. And they found that his brain lit up in the same areas as people who would like actually see this in real life.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So they found that the part of our vision that interprets emotion is separate than the part of our vision that interprets how things look. So that's the idea of this book, is that there's two different roads that we go through things. There's the conscious, like I can actually see this thing, and then there's the subconscious, oh, that's the processing of of emotion.
Yeah.
That's the processing of how things are happening socially. And then he uses that way of thinking about neuroscience to explain a ton of different areas, such as education. I'll have to go look through the book again. I read it a while ago, but it really stuck with me that there's a high road and a low road, so to speak, of how we process things. So someone who's very much in tune with that low road, that subconscious, would be able to pick up on emotions very quickly, whereas someone who doesn't really have that might struggle with interpreting how people are acting, what their emotions are.
Yes.
So maybe an example might be someone who's like on the autism spectrum. They have to consciously process, like, this person is smiling, that means that they're happy. It's like a linear thing. So they're maybe not as fluid on that low road, whereas maybe you being an extrovert, intuitive, feeling perceiver, like, that would be something that you're very in tune with. Like, you walk into the room, you're very much aware of what's going on, and well, at least the emotion of the place, what's happening. So another interesting idea from that book is also very related to my philosophy of education, which, you remember from, I believe, the last episode, was the web of interconnectivity. He said that when he was a kid, I can't remember, him or some other researcher, he said when they were a child, they would go to school every day, and if there was a fresh snow, he would, for just a random reason, just like make a zigzag path out to the playground or something. But he found that everyone followed that path. No one made a new path in the snow. And that's maybe a way to think about what happens in your brain, is that it will always follow the path of least resistance. So no matter if that's the shortest way or not, if that's the easiest way to get there, that's the way your brain's going to take. So if you learn something incorrectly, whether it be content or how to socialize, if that's ingrained in your neural pathways, undoing that is very difficult to do.
Oh, okay.
But so that makes teaching that short way maybe more important, or maybe connecting the right dots, whether it be socially or educationally. So
I have to read that book.
It's very interesting. He has 2 other books as well about emotional intelligence and then how to work with emotional intelligence. All of them are connected. I've read Social Intelligence, definitely learned a lot from it, and I would recommend it to anyone who finds any of this remotely interesting. I think they'd take something away from it. So
yeah, for sure. Well, conclusion. What did we take away from this? Oh boy.
What do you take away, John?
I've been looking at our outline the entire time, and I want to talk about it all again. But what you said towards the very beginning about the tensions that happen in relationships, and how there are compromises, sacrifices, and you have to talk about them. And just like speaking from experience, if you don't, the relationship dies. And even if it's subconsciously, like, you gotta get out there, you gotta do it, you gotta talk about it.
I think we'll have probably an episode about interpersonal relationships.
I think so too.
Maybe even one about the positive aspects, and then maybe one about maybe the negative aspects as well.
Writing it down.
Definitely. We might even bring a guest on for that one.
Yes.
But there are definitely 2 sides to relationships like that, and
yes.
So much to talk about, so much to learn from.
Oh my gosh, yeah. How about you?
I thought it was interesting how a lot of the points that you brought up were geared towards how things play out online, or how things play out virtually, and how that compares to speaking in conversation in real life. And I think maybe it's because you're starting to read Reclaiming Conversation now that that's becoming way more apparent to you. But I just thought it was an interesting trend, is that all your topics were with sort of internet type communication.
Yeah, that's
as
true.
Part of it. It just resonated with me as a unique thing that might indicate some passion of yours.
Yeah.
So
I didn't do that consciously either. Wow. Well, I have some solitude thinking to do.
As do I. But I think that's about it for the content of our episode. Next week, or next episode, I should say, we'll talk about
music.
Music.
Another broad topic.
Another very broad topic, but another
passion
shared passion that we have. And also after that, I believe, did we schedule movies?
Yeah, so we got
Movies
music.
or cinema.
Yeah.
So, a couple great episodes coming up. Thanks for watching this time. This has been the 226.
Peace.